Excellent. Good evening. I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Education to order. It is Tuesday, December 22nd. The Portland Board of Education is meeting virtually through Zoom. Superintendent Batana, may I please ask you to call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo, Mr. Burke.
Here.
Mr. Irish.
Here.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Presente.
Ms. Russell Better.
Here.
Ms. Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Laru.
Here.
Mr. Youssef.
Here.
Ms. Allen. Ms. Boxer McCumber.
Here.
Ms. Chung.
Here.
Ms. Hill. We see you. And Ms. Yangala.
Yes, I'm here.
And Chair Figdor.
Here. Thank you. Will everyone please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
To the flag.
to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic.
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God.
indivisible,
Invisible.
with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I think in subsequent meetings, I'll remind everyone to take themselves off of mute and actually join me. And maybe we can be more in alignment. Good evening, everyone. We're going to start with the report of the chair. And tonight, of course, is our last meeting of 2020. I would say that it has been an excruciating year, defined by a pandemic that has upended public education as we know it. While it's remarkable that many of our students are in school at all in the middle of a deadly pandemic, the disruption to our students' lives and schooling and their social isolation are heartbreaking and enduring. But today, for the first time in so many months, the day got a little longer. Members of our community got one of 2 COVID vaccines, which shows just how much is possible when we have the will. And Congress has finally, at long last, passed a COVID relief bill that will enable us to operate our schools next year in the pandemic and could even provide us the resources to address head-on the socio-emotional and academic consequences that the pandemic has wrought on our students' lives, well-being, and schooling, particularly for our most marginalized students. I want to take this opportunity to thank Portland Public Schools families for their grace as we adapted to the pandemic. And I want to express my deep appreciation and that of the full board to staff across the district for truly Herculean efforts to educate our students in the pandemic. I know for many staff, these last 9 months have been both the most challenging of their careers and also the most dissatisfying. We see you, we see your courage, creativity, and dedication. And while the sun set today at 4:09 p.m., it won't set until 4:10 p.m. tomorrow. Lastly, I want to thank Superintendent Batana and his team for their nonstop work, re-envisioning pre-K to 12th grade education in a pandemic. They have moved mountains, and always while centering our district's whole student equity, achievement, and people goals. We are so very lucky to have you leading our district through this crisis. You have earned our deep confidence. On behalf of the board, I want to thank you. We're optimistic about 2021 in large part because of you, Superintendent Batana, and the focus and commitment of your team. With that, let's turn to the report of the students. Tonight, we're going to hear from Tessa Boxer McCumber, the student board rep for Portland High. Tessa, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Tessa. I'm a junior at Portland High School. So we just finished our very first virtual Spirit Week, hopefully our last too. But during the Spirit Week, students pretty much dressed up themselves and their backgrounds, and it was a good way to stay engaged and continue the tradition of Spirit Week. During Wednesdays, we all meet with our clubs. A couple things the clubs have been doing is our social justice club, led by Ella Anderson and Charlie LaChance. They're collaborating with our Black Student Union, led by Ramat Ali and Angie Shimway. They're making murals all around Greater Portland, which is really cool if you guys look into it. Our Key Club is collecting hats and mittens for students and teachers who may not have them. The ninth graders just had their very first student government election, where they elected Caden Hemond as the president and Hannah Hawks as their vice president. We also are coming to the end of our first semester, and people are all prepping for exams. And we also just had parent-teacher conferences, so parents and teachers are very in contact with each other. That's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, Tessa. I can't wait to see those murals around the city. With that, I'm going to turn to the superintendent for his remarks. I'm sorry, and his report overall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to begin my comments today by recognizing the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki, or people of the Dawnland. We're honored to have their children among our students today. I want to report on work that we are engaged in around state accountability assessments for students who are English language learners. As many of you know, these students are required by the state as part of Maine's federal accountability plan to be tested annually to measure their growth in English language proficiency with an assessment called Access for ELLs. The assessment measures student growth in receptive and expressive language. We do not receive the data until well after the school year is over, which makes it marginally helpful as a half a year of instruction has passed since students took the test. The assessment requires a significant amount of preparation and bandwidth from our staff. Among other things, students have to be tested individually for their speaking proficiency. Because of the intensity and duration of the assessment, students are parsed into small groups and require direct attention from staff who are trained to specifically administer this test. In a normal year, the assessment is the most resource-intensive test we administer. Again, in a normal year, the window opens in January and carries through the month of February. And during this time, our teachers largely spend the better part of their time on administering the assessment. This year, under our current circumstances, the challenge is magnified. Many students are learning remotely full-time. Most students are in school half as much as they normally are, and there are possible interruptions for quarantines. We have limits on proximity and the continuous time together, and students and staff are all wearing masks. Earlier this year, our staff that works with students who are English language learners approached us to advocate for not administering this assessment this year. We, along with colleagues in South Portland and Westbrook, advocated for a suspension of the test with the Maine Department of Education, and they, in turn, did the same with the U.S. Department of Education. The current administration in Washington has denied the state's request. With the impending change of administrations in D.C., we are hopeful that the new administration will reconsider the state's request and grant us relief for this year. To date, DOE has granted an extension of the assessment window into April in order to buy time for this process to run its course. DOE has also signaled that if they are unsuccessful, they expect that districts will make the decisions that are in the best interest of students. After consultation with our staff, and given the challenges with the test administration, the fact that student learning has been interrupted significantly by the pandemic, which makes the value of the test scores questionable at best, I believe it is in the best interest of our students and staff to not administer the test this year. With this in mind, we will be bringing a resolution to you on January 5th, asking you to endorse my plan to not administer access for ELL in the 2021 school year. We will have a workshop and a first read of the resolution, and we will ask for your consideration and action at the meeting on January 19th. Yesterday, we hosted a parent university session on career and technical education. This session was part of a series of regional workshops looking to get community input on what our vision for 21st century career and technical education should be. The event was co-sponsored as part of our regional collaboration with the Greater Sebago Educational Alliance. We had a great turnout and received excellent feedback on the barriers that currently exist and suggestions for improving our programming. Next, I would like to ask Andy Summers, the Executive Director of the Foundation for Portland Public Schools, to share her quarterly report with the board on the work of the foundation. As you know, Andy, this is her, I believe, second report to the board, and Andy has been with us since days before the pandemic started and has done an amazing job of really centering the work of the district in the outreach for the foundation. And so I'm looking forward to Andy's report. Is Andy here?
I'm here. Yeah. Thank you very much, Superintendent Botana. I'm going to share my screen. I just have a few slides for you. Oh, except that the host has disabled sharing. But maybe, I don't know if someone could play the slides for me.
They can make you a co-host.
Either, or someone could play them, whatever's easier.
All set.
You're all set.
Let's try again. Super. All right. Thank you. Great. So, oops. All right, sorry. So I want to just start by sharing some of the key things we've done. This is a quarterly report. So this is the major priorities we've been working on at the foundation for September, October, and up until December 15th. Unsurprisingly, the first one has been a COVID-19 emergency response. We've continued with the food fund and with families in crisis, and those have been as robust as ever, unfortunately, providing food for families who are facing food insecurity, rental relief, medical relief, and utilities. Pending the federal funds that come in, we have raised $82,000 to fund community partnerships for staff children if that full program is not able to continue, and we have that money set aside. We've also gathered some donations and so on. Our kind of keynote program is the Equity and Innovation Teacher Grants, which happen in October or November. And this year we dispersed 61 grants to teachers, social workers, school nurses, and others around the district, totaling $48,595, which is very exciting. We continue to manage our school-based funds. We write grants for district needs. And we've had some growth to our board, which has really been a welcome diversification of perspectives, experience, racial and ethnic diversity, age diversity. So we added 3 students to our board, one from each of our high schools: Aislinn Funkhauser of Casco Bay, Jonna Rosenthal of Deering, and Ashley Daniels of Portland High joined our board back in November. And as of our next board meeting, we'll have 4 new other board members, which we're thrilled about. And that includes Abdullahi Ali, Ahmed Abdiyaman, Marnie Morioni, who you all know well, and Blanca Santiago. And the other piece that we've launched is an advisory board. We're really hoping to continue to diversify perspectives in the community and kind of grow our footprint in Portland and help reach out to additional stakeholders, whether it's alumni, parents, businesses, community members. So we have this tremendous group of 12 who are our first ever advisory board. And I won't read their names, but I'll leave them up there for you to take a quick look at. And then historically, we do share major donors in the quarter. So I've separated that into 3 categories. So these are individuals on this first slide who have donated $1,000 or more in the last 3 months. And I do like to start by saying that the vast majority of our donors donate $25, $50, $100. And we very much welcome those donors. We list them all in our annual report. But these are major donors who maybe require a bigger shout out. So the only one I'll draw your attention to here is that we did receive an anonymous donation of $150,000 back in September, and that was to support the funding of multicultural, bicultural, or multicultural and multilingual health aides to be part of the communication efforts around the pandemic. And then this is our list of either foundation grants or businesses who have donated $1,000 or more or granted $1,000 or more. And this is a tremendous quarter for us. We've brought in $197,000 in grants or corporate donations. And finally, we also take in-kind donations or non-cash gifts. And this is the list of organizations that have donated supplies of some sort to the district via the foundation in the last 3 months. So all told, we raised about $400,000 in major donors over those 3 months. As we move ahead, the current funding or grant seeking we're looking for is continuing to fund the Families in Crisis Fund. That fund is getting somewhat low right now. I think you're all aware of our Addressing the Opportunity Gap campaign, which is to deepen and accelerate the equity work in the district. We had a goal of $100,000 for that campaign. We're currently at $82,000, so we're quite confident we'll meet that $100,000 this year. Just starting to work with the district on additional funding for extended learning or summer school for next summer, having some conversations around secondary math curriculum or pedagogy work and professional development, increasing the interpretation and translation capacity of the district, and then always seeking funding for our next year of teacher grants. I'm open to, when we jump to questions, other ideas or priorities that anyone on this board feel like would be important for us to consider for fundraising. And so that just brings us to this summary. You can see over the last 5 years, we've typically been an organization that brings in about $500,000 to benefit the district each year. But we've had a tremendous year this year. We've raised $582,254 in less than half of our fiscal year. So you can see in this column on the right, which is about equal or higher than many of our past years. And that only reflects the year, half of the year to date. And I think that in large part, I want to point out that that's, I think, in huge part because we have added a second staff member. We have an advancement coordinator now. Her name is Janine Bischoff. And with 2 people, we've been able to launch systems like a donor management system and grant management software that should be kind of a given for a development organization, but are new to us over the last year and a half. We've been able to increase our communications and analysis of efforts, and we've had 362 new donors in the last year. And so I bring this up just to share that as I believe that we're aiming to have a really large benefit for the district. Her salary and benefits cost about $50,000 a year. We have fundraised for those for the first 2 years. So she's paid for by the foundation through June, but it's my hope that this year's school budget could include all or part of that cost, potentially just the benefits, or ideally her full salary. And that's it. I will stop the share and see if anyone has any questions. Sarah has a question.
Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Andy, very much. It's very exciting from concept to where we are today, and the amount of money that we're raising, as well as the connections that we're making to the community. This was always, one of our goals, and was here for the infancy and where you're taking it. So I think you're taking it to the next level. So appreciate all of your hard work, as well as all of the donors in the community. Very generous. I think it's a nice reflection to see everybody pulling together. But really great job. Thank you very much, Andy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andy, so thank you so much for reporting. You know, what an amazing job you guys are doing. Just ridiculous numbers in fundraising. I appreciate you pointing to, to the having someone else help to tell us that that's what's helped you increase the amount of funds that you've raised. I'm wondering if we could also attribute the types of funds that you are now putting out there, and that they really are very appealing as a as a partner to what we are trying to do as a district. There seems to be a stronger correlation between these funds, and I'm particularly looking at the Addressing the Opportunity Gap, Families in Crisis Fund, and of course the Food Fund. And these things were so closely aligned to what we're trying to do as a district. Do you think that also contributed to the increase of donations?
I do. And I also think in part that the pandemic itself caused an increase in donations. I know that many organizations, including the schools, are suffering and struggling. And I think as a result of that, people really saw the intense need of the school district and wanted to help meet those needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that also. Again, I just want to say, a really sincere thank you for the work that you've done. As I told you, I'm thrilled that you have students on your board right now. That to me is a magical. I recognize a couple of the names of these board members, so you certainly have some amazing students there to help you out. And then the advisory board, what a great idea. Obviously, we recognize a lot of those names. Former school board member Jenna Van Dil, that name just popped out. Yeah. So just, again, great work that you guys are doing. Incredibly proud to support your work, and anything that we can do to continue to strengthen the foundation. We're certainly here for that. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Burke.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome work, Andy. Coming in, swinging hard during the pandemic. Really appreciated. And I would hold up what Roberto said, just the alignment of things are compelling and obviously effective. One, you had offered the opportunity to speak to things that we'd like to see you focus on, and I would just hold up conversation that we've had outside of here about looking at the work that we're doing in decolonizing the curriculum, knowing that we had a $27,000 line in this fiscal year's budget, and that was reduced to $8,000, I believe. And I know you stepped in there and anticipating in a tough budget year that we might see similar things. Work on continuing our outdoor learning and how we will transition beyond Brooke Teller's work as a part-time district coordinator and the building level work. So those would be two places that I'd hold up. And I'm going to ask the question just to test my assumptions, because I think I know the answer, but I was just curious if you could speak more to why you're asking for the district through our local funding to pay for the staff position, given the successful funding thus far, and just want to give you a chance to articulate that more. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. We've raised a lot of funds, but those funds generally go directly to benefit students and teachers in the district. So they're, a very tiny percentage of them goes towards our administrative fees and our operating costs. And so my hope is that the cost benefit of our, increased work would make it worthwhile for the district, that a $15,000 to $50,000 investment would result in several hundred thousands of dollars of additional investment in the schools. We're committed to trying to fundraise if we need to, but the hope is that we could focus our efforts, directly on benefiting students and teachers and families.
Can I just speak quickly to that as well? Because, I think that Andy was not here when we originally envisioned this, what we call the capacity building campaign with, former executive director Kate Snyder. This was intended to be a proof of concept. So in fact, the foundation raised money to be able to support that additional position, to be able to come back at some point to the board and say, just in the same way that the board committed to funding the position of executive director. So Andy's, compensation is paid for by the school district. And, what we were trying to prove was that if we actually increased the investment in the foundation's capacity, that we would be able to increase significantly, not just pay for itself, but actually be able to double or triple the investment in those positions. And those were my words. Kate always cringed when I said things like double and triple, but I think that was the idea, that it would show that it's well worth the investment.
Yeah. And it would be obviously ideal for the funding for that position to be sustainable and not something we're constantly having, to search for or scrabble for, because this is a person whose job and livelihood this is as well. So to have a little stability in that, like anyone who has a grant funded position.
Yeah, that all stands up for me. And thanks for speaking more to it. And thanks for all the work.
Thank you so much, Mr. Burke. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Andy, for the presentation. It was very exciting to see all the work that you've been doing. I just had a question, and please tell me if another time would be better for this, since this is, all new learning for me. And Ms. Bondo is not present tonight. So one of my questions was about potential work that Board Member Youssef and myself and Ms. Bondo on the Public Affairs Committee. I was just curious about, I know you mentioned something in one of those pieces of work, whether it already had happened or you were considering something, was about, can you just clarify, was it about translation or about some kind of communication piece? Yeah. Could you just, first that piece, and then I had a question, but could you help me with remembering what that was?
Yeah, we received a $10,000 grant from the Elmina B. Sewell Foundation to increase the translation and interpretation capacity for the district, and then another $750 mini grant from the Walmart Community Grant Program from the Falmouth Walmart. Both of those funds went to that, and that came, directly from conversations with Grace Valenzuela.
Okay. So those have a specific purpose already in mind, those funds?
They do. Well, and I could maybe let Grace speak to that, but the idea is that, the tremendous staff of the Multilingual and Multicultural Center are stretched so thin right now, and that no one could have anticipated, of course, the amount of communications that would need to be translated, because we're communicating with families so much more frequently with safety and health issues, with schedule changes, and so it's beyond what was budgeted, and beyond those folks who are salaried, is my understanding, have time to fit into their days.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think what some of my curiosity was just about what pieces were already earmarked for, projects you already had in mind, and then just some of my wondering about potential funding for some work that could be furthering communication, from the district throughout our community, but certainly towards marginalized communities, and just wondering, and I know the UNM piece is specifically, I think, about hiring, is that correct? But I just was wondering if there were funds that are part of, or, potentially could be used for some pieces that would be about outreach communication, just as I'm learning and thinking with committee work, what we might be.
Yeah, I would be happy to talk about that more. I actually am hoping that I can reach out to yourself and Mr. Youssef and Mr. Irish to do one-on-one meetings at the start of the new year, and just make sure that we get fully up to speed.
Okay, great. So there are pieces that are grants that are very specific, it sounds like, and then
many or most of our individual donations or grants are restricted for specific projects. But our annual appeal, our visionary donors, and sometimes people get our unrestricted gifts, and then sometimes people will give in the just say wherever it's needed most.
Great.
So we use those funds to pay for postage and copying and our bookkeeper and so on. But we also sometimes have enough. And part of those funds, for example, the board voted to give $20,000 of our reserve funds to keep the community partnerships going for children of staff.
Thank you.
Andy, thank you so much. I am blown away by how the results that you've achieved in relatively little time. And to me, the thing that is most meaningful, in addition to the dollars to get the work done, is the connection that you're deepening with the community. That's so meaningful and important long term. So thank you so much for all of your work and for your presentation tonight.
Super. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Andy. I'll continue then with our update on our school reopening, something that we've been doing throughout the fall. Let me start by talking a little bit about our decision to move our secondary schools to remote this week. The primary reason we made this decision was to ensure that our nurses would not be spending the bulk of the end of this week, which is a holiday for many of them, doing arduous contact tracing and notification of close contacts. That actually happened during the Thanksgiving holiday break, and our nurses have been nothing short of amazing during these past 9 months, and they've asked for very little. So this was a move that we made to ensure that they didn't have to do that over the coming days. We opted to do this with our secondary schools for a couple of reasons. First, in the past few weeks, particularly since Thanksgiving, we've seen the majority of our cases at the secondary level. Currently, all of our schools, all of our secondary schools, with the exception of Lincoln Middle School, are designated as an outbreak status by the CDC. So that gives you an idea of the significant surge that we've seen in our secondary schools. The second reason is that our middle and high schools are well equipped with one-to-one technology. So it's easier for them to transition into a remote-only setting than it is for our elementary grades, which are just now receiving new devices. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple minutes. I also want to discuss why we decided to call snow days on Thursday and Friday last week. As many in the community have pointed out, we had anticipated not calling snow days except in extreme situations where the weather caused widespread outages, which would make it unpredictable to have learning happen remotely. We announced this to the public in early December, just ahead of the anticipated windstorm, and most other districts in the area have also established this protocol for this year, given the fact that we are spending significant time shuttling back and forth between in-person and remote learning. As it turns out, we learned after that original announcement that we were not universally aligned on what the implications were for what should happen for both staff and students on those days. So we had to convene a series of meetings with our school leaders and our collective bargaining partners to make sure that we had a thorough, shared understanding of staff expectations on these days. We achieved that on Friday. So going forward, our stakeholders should expect that we will mostly have remote learning days. Because we were not able to call remote days on Thursday and Friday of last week, those 2 days will need to be made up at the end of the school year. And based on that, the last day for students is June 15th, and the last day for school year only staff is June 16th. I want to speak about two related issues. One is the fact that Cumberland County shifted to yellow designation under the DOE's school safety indicator system. We look at the state's designation carefully, but it's important to remember that we are currently operating in a hybrid model that is consistent with what is recommended under a yellow scenario. As we've been saying since the middle of the fall, we will look at our local data and context to make decisions about how we operate our schools. So we're not going to just shift because the color designation shifts. In addition to the state designation, we look at the number of students and staff who are quarantined as close contacts and other data points to make our decisions, such as we did in opting to run school in a remote format at our secondary schools this week. As I pointed out, most of our secondary schools have been designated as being in outbreak status. I want to clarify that the criteria for designation as such is that there are 3 unrelated cases in the school over a 14-day period. We have found that the designation is generally lagging considerably over the time that we found out about the cases. In other words, we don't hear from CDC until oftentimes we've run the course of the remedy that needs to be put in place. As you've seen, there have been instances where we went ahead and acted on the data that we had in hand around the number of cases and the availability of staff, and then have been notified down the road that the prevalence of cases caused it to actually be designated as an outbreak by CDC. But it didn't require us to extend or change our actions as a result. We have a solid working relationship with CDC now, and I believe that they would agree that we're doing a fine job with our decision-making and communication. I would, again, like to recognize our school nurses in particular for the yeoman work that they're doing in this area. And I would also like to thank Assistant Superintendent Erin Townsend and Ann Rothacker and Michelle Bernier for cranking out communication to staff and school communities in the wake of all of these cases. I also want to take this opportunity to reiterate that we've changed our protocol for staff and families returning from out-of-state trips. We are now requiring that anyone leaving the state to anywhere other than the exempted states, which at this time are New Hampshire and Vermont, that anyone doing that quarantine for 10 days after returning, and if asymptomatic at the end of that period, they can return to work. So 10 days quarantine and asymptomatic, return to work. This can be cut short by a negative PCR test taken a minimum of 3 days after returning from the trip, and of course, being asymptomatic. Of course, we don't know who goes where, so as with everything related to this pandemic, we ask everyone to assume responsibility for keeping themselves and everyone else in our school community safe. It is better for one person to quarantine than it is to bring down a whole cohort, a group of staff, or an entire school because those quarantine guidelines were not followed. Finally, I'm happy to report that we are completing the rollout of our pre-K through grade 2 iPad devices. Over the past week, our IT team unpacked and set up 1,600 devices that have been distributed to schools now. In some cases, our elementary schools were able to begin training students on the use of the devices these past 2 days. We're now expecting to receive 1,600 Chromebooks next week, which will give us the inventory needed to ensure that all of our students in grades 3 through 5 also have their own device. We expect to be able to roll those devices out to students when we return from winter break. I'm ever so grateful to our IT team for their tireless work since the summer to procure and now distribute these devices. Along the way, they have doggedly cobbled together a basic inventory that has allowed us to manage in what has been the most challenging of circumstances. They've been nothing short of amazing. I'm also grateful to other members of our school community, to principals, teachers, and students and parents for their patience, grace, and resourcefulness in working around the lack of one-to-one devices. As I acknowledged at every meeting, I know that we've asked a lot of our staff, our students, and our families, and they have risen to that challenge. So let's continue to work together to ensure our students continue to have a safe and successful learning experience in the new year. Today was the last school day of the year for our students and school year staff. Here's wishing a great winter break and happy holidays to members of our community that celebrate Christmas or Kwanzaa, and a happy new year to all. We look forward to seeing you again on January 4th for what I hope will be a much better 2021. So that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. Now we're going to move to the report of the Secretary. And we have consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of December 8th, 2020. Is there a motion? Mr. Burke, is there a second?
Second that.
Ms. Thompson, any questions on the motion? Is there public comment on the motion? Again, we are considering the meeting minutes from our December 8th, 2020 meeting. And if you want to participate, if you want to make a comment as a member of the public, you can use a raise your hand function. And if I see anyone, I'll go into further detail about how to do that. Okay. Is there any board discussion? Yes, Mr. Youssef.
Thank you, Ms. Fegder. I just want to ask a question about the decision to open the school. And I want to ask the superintendent.
Mr. Youssef, if you don't mind if I interrupt you for a minute, let's finish the minutes first.
Sure.
Minutes, and then we can go back and you can go ahead with your question for the superintendent on his report. Does that work?
Yes,
okay.
Definitely. Thank you
so much. Okay, so by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in favor of approving the meeting minutes of December 8th, 2020.
Ms. Bondo, Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Irish,
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
yes
Ms. Allen, Ms. Boxer-McCumber,
Yes.
Ms. Chung,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Yangala,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes.
I don't see Ms. Hill. Is she still with us? I know she had to leave early.
She's joining us in a little bit.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. So the minutes are unanimously approved. And Mr. Youssef, go ahead with your question for the superintendent.
Thank you again, Ms. Figder, and I apologize, I'm still learning the process. And my question was the districts that around us, what are the level of consideration when it comes to making decision? Are we comparing Portland district to other districts, or?
So I'm not 100% sure, if this is going to answer. So if I don't answer, just, we meet weekly as a Cumberland County Superintendents Group, and among the things that we do is we talk about, what our current situation is and how we're thinking about moving our work forward. We've been very collaborative in this process we've always been collaborative, but in particular, since the pandemic hit, we've met on a weekly basis to sort of stay informed with each other. So I think, that doesn't mean that we always do the same things. So as I mentioned, earlier, Thursday and Friday of last week, the majority of districts on Thursday had a remote day. There were a couple that also had a snow day in the same way that we had a snow day. And then on Friday, they all were either in session or in some variation of that being remote. So I know, like, for example, South Portland was remote for the high school, but they were in person for the elementary and middle schools. So I'm not 100% sure that answers your question, but that's.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. And please, as you have any questions, the process is, we want to make the process work for you. So just let us know. Let me know.
I apologize because I should have asked if anybody had any questions on my report before I moved on. So my apologies, Mr. Youssef.
Are there any other questions on the superintendent's report? Okay, thank you so much. We're going to move now to consent items, and we have an acknowledgement of donations made to the district. Will the superintendent speak to this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, as soon as I find my place in the world again. So under board policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district, and as required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item. Our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. And I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance, including this meeting, handmade mittens worth $150 from Mrs. Norman Anderson, a $400 Amazon gift card to support implementation of tobacco-free schools from Portland Public Health Department in response to our updated tobacco policy, 145 pairs of winter mittens and gloves worth $1,200 to distribute to students from Maine Nephrology on behalf of Tamara Hillier, and 80 pairs of winter boots worth $3,000 to distribute to students in need from the Joe Bornstein Winter Warmth Drive. We are very grateful for their generous support and contributions to the Portland Public Schools.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. Now we move to new business, and our only new business today is first read to update the PEA contract Article 10G. This is with respect to lunch breaks for secondary school educators. And as it's first read, there are no comments, and we're just noting that we're going to have a workshop on this item at the end of the meeting. So now we're going to move to old business, consideration and action to authorize the superintendent to proceed with development of design specifications and seek bids for the rebuilding of Longfellow Elementary School, Reiki Elementary School, and Presumpscot Elementary School under the Buildings for the Future bond. Superintendent, will you speak to this motion?
Yes. Do you want to get a motion first?
Oh, yes. Thank you. I'll get there sometime soon. Is there?
Actually,
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. All right, now, Superintendent, would you like to speak to the motion?
I did not get the second on that.
I want to give a second.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Okay, so now I'll speak to the motion. So today we're asking you to authorize me to issue bids for the 3 remaining buildings for our future elementary school renovation projects at Longfellow, Presumpscot, and Reiki. As you recall, we had a workshop at our last meeting on December 8th to discuss the impact of the Green New Deal on the projects and review plans for the 3 schools. As we discussed at that time, we're proposing a staggered rollout of the bids, with the first bid being issued in February for Longfellow, followed by a bid issuance for Reiki in March and for Presumpscot in April. We vetted the rationale for this recommendation and secured the unanimous endorsement of this rollout with the District Advisory Building Committee at their meeting last week. You'll recall that we talked during the workshop about the fact that we had not previously fully vetted that plan, and we did that last week, and it was unanimously endorsed by the DABC. So our team is here, prepared to answer any questions you may have, and hopefully begin to move forward with this long-awaited and critical step in the Buildings for Our Future process. So with us tonight, our Harriman Architect team of Mark Lee and Lisa Sowin, and also our facilities director, Steve Stilfen. And I don't know, is Mr. Sherwood is also here with us. So Doug Sherwood, our facilities coordinator, are also here. And so we'll answer any questions that you have before you go ahead and proceed with the vote.
Thank you. Are there questions on the motion? Okay. Is there public comment on the motion? And let me just take a moment to walk through the public comment process. So any person wishing to address the board shall be recognized, and you can do so by using the raise your hand function, and you'll have up to 3 minutes to speak. So is there any public comment on the motion? This is with respect to the Buildings for the Future projects. Okay, is there board discussion?
Ms. Figdor, I'm not sure if we want to do the presentation and then have questions afterwards. Were you doing anything like that, or?
There's no presentation. We're here to answer questions. We had the workshop.
Oh, good. Okay. I didn't know if they were presenting anything else. Thank you.
Any board discussion? Mr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, I guess I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say that this is a critical point in the timeline for the 3 schools. This is we had a really informative workshop last week, but this is not a simple procedural vote. This will have a significant impact on a project that a lot of people have been dedicating ridiculous amounts of times for some time. So I'm excited that we're here. And obviously I plan to support the motion and allow the superintendent to enter into the next phase of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodriguez. Any other board comment? I'll take the opportunity myself to also just note what a milestone we have achieved to be moving forward with bids for these 3 schools, which will bring us to soon breaking ground. The plan is this spring on all 3 of the remaining schools. It's just such an achievement, and has taken, as Mr. Rodriguez said, incredibly hard work over multiple years. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to thank the Harriman team who's here with us tonight, as well as Steve Stilfen and Doug Sherwood, who have been working so hard to move these projects forward in the midst of a pandemic that has had brought up so many operational needs and building facility needs. And yet we've been able to move forward with these projects. I also want to acknowledge the role of the superintendent in keeping these projects front and center, despite everything that we've been dealing with in the last year. It's remarkable to be at this point where we're finally at a place where these projects are going to start to get built. So thank you so much for the great work of the different committees, as well as the board for your diligence in considering these projects and this step we're taking tonight. So with that, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of authorizing the superintendent to proceed with development of design specifications and seek bids for the rebuilding of Longfellow Elementary School, Reiki Community School, and Presumpscot Elementary School under the Buildings for Our Future bond.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Irish?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Oh, yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Definitely.
Mr. Haro?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Allen? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh. Hello, welcome. Ms. Boxer-McCumber?
Yes.
Ms. Chung?
Yes.
Ms. Hill? Ms. Yangala?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, consideration and action to approve the superintendent's recommendation for continuing and reducing services currently funded through the Coronavirus Relief Fund after December 31st, 2020. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, and is there a second? Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Superintendent, will you speak to the motion?
Yes, I will. So today we're asking you to vote on the next steps with our COVID relief fund and what you can expect in the coming weeks. We had an extensive workshop on this topic at our meeting on December 8th. And since there have been significant developments, including the passage, as you heard during the chair's report, of the new federal COVID relief bill, which includes significant funding for pre-K-12 education. Because the ink on this bill is not dry, in fact, I'm not sure that it's actually been signed yet, there are many questions about what the implications are for us. Because of that, tonight I'm revising my recommendation from what I brought to you at the last meeting to allow us some time to better understand what is in the bill and determine what the impact is on our funding levels going forward. I also had some questions posed by board members regarding my initial recommendation. I want to answer those today before your vote on this plan tonight. So we have a couple of things that we have included in the packet. So there is an updated presentation for tonight. So if you've not seen that, we just added that earlier today. So we're going to be walking through that. And I've also attached the first sort of comprehensive briefing that we've received on the new COVID relief bill. So that is also attached in board docs under the public content, so you can refer to that. So with that, can we have Miranda? Next slide, please. So what, as I mentioned tonight, what we're going to be doing is updating you a little bit on the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. That's the name of the portion of the COVID relief bill that deals with elementary and secondary education. And then I'll discuss my revised recommendation and answer some of the questions that were posed between the last meeting and this meeting by board members that had to do with communication with families about the discontinuation of the community the community programming, and also information about the minimum wage referendum implementation and why we did not include that in our projected costs for the remainder of the year. So next slide, please. A couple of things about the elementary and secondary schools emergency relief fund. First, the what we know, and then the what we are yet to fully understand. So we know that it's part of this larger bill that is the sort of almost $1 trillion in different relief components, and there is a significant portion of that, $54 billion, is actually dedicated to the elementary and secondary schools relief. So just to put that in context, that's about 4 times the amount of money that was allocated in the spring relief bill. So, significant increase. It's similar to the CARES Act in that it can be used to basically support any of the existing programmatic efforts that are, in place in the district. So it can be used for that. And in addition to that, it can be used to assess and address learning loss. So I think, when you heard Andy talking about some of the things that we're doing, trying to fundraise for, summer school and things along those lines, that this funding can be used to support those types of activities. So that's, outstanding, as well as to support facility improvements to address air quality concerns, something that we did a significant amount of with funding that we received from the original bill. And, this is an opportunity for other people to be able to use that money for that purpose. Another important piece of information about this is that we will be able to use whatever funding we receive through this allocation through September of 22. So to put that in context, that's our current budget year, and then all of the next budget year, so the FY22 and potentially the beginning of the FY23 budget year. So this funding does not have to all be spent. We've spent the fall talking about having to spend money right now, and this is, different from that in that it allows us to extend it over a significant period of time. So this, is not something that we need to rush and spend. It can be used to support our work for a significant period of time. Also in the bill was language that extended the use of the CRF funds. So those funds that we've been talking about all fall, saying, they run out on December 31st. We are now, the bill allows those funds to continue to be used through a year from this December 31st. So December of 2021. I've reached out to the commissioner to get a preliminary response around whether we would be able to access the resources that we weren't able to use. She replied she doesn't know yet, but obviously is committed to doing whatever she can to help us to do what's best for kids. So I have utter confidence that she will figure out a way to do that if it's at all possible. So that's an exciting development. It also means that any potential money that we didn't get to spend from the allocation that we have, that we might have had to return, will have the ability to be spent over the course of the year, which is great. We've had, for example, issues with our technology, perhaps not being able to get everything that we needed to get in this time frame, and so this relieves any misgivings or concerns that might have existed about that. Next slide, please. So, there are things that we don't know. How will the funding be distributed? We originally heard that it would be distributed in the same way that it was in the CARES allocation. So that meant that it ran through the Title I formula to states, and then the states distributed out through the Title I formula. That is no longer as clear as it was to me, yesterday. I've been in contact with both Senator King and Congressman Pingree's office, and in the information that they've provided, they don't know definitively that is how it's going to be distributed. So that is still to be determined. I'm hopeful that it's just that's the way that it's going to happen. I think that would work really well for us, and we're hoping that that's the way that it runs. And we also don't know exactly when this funding will be available to us. I think those are questions that we have. And I mentioned earlier the question about whether we can access the CRF funding that was allocated that we weren't able to use because of the time constraints. So that remains a question for us to answer. So in light of this, I mentioned that I was going to revise my recommendation. So obviously, I'm feeling better about our outlook than I did, 2 weeks ago, or even 48 hours ago, for that matter. So the recommendation is that we continue to provide the community-based programming for an additional month in anticipation of the fact that we will know more about what this funding looks like, what it can be used for, and what the timelines are in this coming month. So my plan would be for us to come back to you on January 19th, with hopefully additional information about how the money is rolling out, how much we expect to receive, whether the CRF funding, we can access that or not, and then have you make a decision by February 5th at the next board meeting after that. And in the interim, for us to continue to support the community-based programming that we've had in place. Can I have the next slide? So I'm going to ask Miranda to walk through this. This is the detailed picture of what our costs are, and also where the savings are coming to support some of these activities. So Miranda, do you want to take that?
Sure. So this is very similar to what you've seen before. Most of the lines haven't actually changed. The only things that have changed are the few things that are highlighted in bold. So I can just kind of, quickly go through what you're looking at. So on the left side of this slide are the continuation costs that we discussed before. So staffing costs about $3 million. And then one thing that has changed is we've added back 1 month of partner costs. So about $80,000, well, I should say $165,000 together between Boys and Girls Club and Rec, and those are the biggest programs, and then about $167,000 for all other partners. And this includes both before and after care partnerships as well as full day programming. So approximately $330,000 added back into the costs to support 1 more month of community partnerships. And that's the only thing that has changed on the left side of the screen. And then on the right side of the screen are the funding sources that we discussed last time as well. We have some savings in the categories listed, and then we also have the funding sources that we discussed previously, the CARES contingency, the Medicaid fund, and then new on this slide today is the fundraising that the Foundation for the Portland Public Schools has done and talked about earlier, about $82,000 that we can put towards this. And also I should note the Medicaid fund previously, in our original presentation, we had a surplus of about $165,000 that we then put back into the Medicaid fund to begin this process of trying to preserve those reserves. We've taken that back out to also fund this $330,000 that we're adding in costs to fund the partnerships for 1 more month. So where that leaves us is really at a deficit of $85,000, which I think at this point, with where we are with the federal funding, it's pretty unlikely that that funding isn't going to come through. So that doesn't concern us greatly. But if the worst does happen, which, hoping is very unlikely at this point, that $85,000 deficit would be unfortunate, but manageable. We could make that up. We could make decisions necessary to make that up in the latter half of the year. So we feel like it's a reasonable risk given where we are right now with the federal funding. So that's where this leaves us. And as you can see, we're still preparing this slide with the kind of cost of instituting the minimum wage grayed out, so that those costs, that $85,000, is not part of this equation at this point in time. If we were to add that back in, it would double our deficit to about $170,000. So.
Superintendent, you're muted.
Yep, sorry about that. Just a little deeper look at both our day programs and our before and after school. So this first slide shows you by program the number of students that are served and the cost of running that program for this extended period. So for this month that we're proposing. And then the same data on the next slide for the full day programming. So this is, again, the number of students that are served and the monthly cost of continuing those services. I think I have one more slide on this. Just because this was one of the questions that we were asked in terms of what communication we've had with families, letting them know that we were going to recommend discontinuing the programs. And so, in the board packet, there are copies of the letters that were sent to families earlier in December prior to the first board meeting, letting them know that this was my recommendation and it was being considered by the board over the course of the month. We also communicated directly with the community partners about the plans, what I was proposing to the board and what the timeline was so that they could have communication with their families. And it was also in our community newsletters, both on December 4th and then again last Friday when we sent a second monthly community newsletter. So in both of those, we, at the time, we were still thinking that this was, going to be discontinued. And so we, we were communicating with families about it in that way. We have, yesterday when we saw this, the potential for this, we had staff in touch with community partners to make sure that they understood that I was going to be revising my recommendation and making sure that they were able to re-up their support for the programs. So obviously, if you approve that recommendation today, then we will have additional communication with our partners and families over the next week to update them on the status and let them know that there's at least 1 month of additional funding with the potential for it being included in our planning through the rest of the year if the resources play out in ways that would allow us to do that. So that's all on the community partners and my revised recommendation. So we could pause and take your questions on that, or we could just quickly, we have a handful of slides on the minimum wage, and we could do that. We could do either, whatever you prefer. So Madam Chair, I don't know.
Let's pause for questions. Ms. Trevorrow.
Thank you, Chair. So my question was the additional revenue in the Medicaid or Medicare, Medicaid line item and the foundation line item. So I'm trying to think of how to word this so it makes sense. So the impetus behind funding this for 1 month came because we have some expectation that we're going to get federal funding. However, we kind of found places within our budget to fund it for that 1 month for the most part, correct? So it's not like we're budgeting anticipated revenue that we're not sure where it's going to come from yet.
That's correct. The 82,000 from the foundation is funding that we were going to use to retain a portion of the programming for the children of our staff to be able to continue to provide that programming. And so that's something that the foundation had committed to fundraising for, and they have. And so we're counting that, but now obviously we're continuing we're counting that towards the entirety of the program for the month, not just for the staff portion of it. So that's the foundation portion. And then the Medicaid, this was originally 650. Then when we had made some adjustments to it, we had, returned that money to the reserve, but now we're basically using up the reserve to be able to account for all of that, for all of the costs associated with running the program.
And assuming that federal funding comes through, do we have any intention to pay back those line items? Okay, got it. I think my other questions were answered. One thing I just wanted to flag was whether or not we needed procedurally an amendment when we vote on this motion.
I think that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trevorrow. Mr. Burke.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one, I'm wondering, Superintendent, if at some point we could have perhaps a workshop sometime later this winter or spring to talk about this, the impacts of the pandemic on our students, particularly when we talk about learning loss. There's a lot of opinion pieces going around about, what does it mean to be a human being going through a pandemic and also be a student, and what should we understand about that? So I just feel like that would be good for the board to be educated on, as it will inform our actions in the future. I see you shaking your head. The other one, per the minimum wage issue, considering that we have additional funding that we're anticipating, I know you're following the legal advice that you were given that we could wait until 2022 and still be compliant with the referendum, but it doesn't seem that we'd have the budgetary pressure that we may have thought last time we met to head in that direction. So just curious if you could say more about not instituting that.
Yeah, we have a couple of slides. Should I do those now? We, purposely sort of waited, and we're going to do that as a separate thing, but I'm happy to do it now.
Oh, I'll follow your lead. I'm sorry.
Let's stay on the community partners, given that there looks to be a lot of questions, and then we can move on. Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you, Mr. Burke. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I was going to ask was what Ms. Trevorrow asked at the end of her comment was whether we needed to amend the motion. And then as I thought more about it, maybe I didn't understand if a vote, why a vote was even needed if we're going to stay the course. Is it because of the amounts that we're shifting through our budget items? Because if the end result is to stay doing what we're doing today, I just wanted to understand that better.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really thought it through until you asked it. So I guess, we don't have CRF funding come, January 1st. So we are making a deliberate decision to continue this programming. There are people who are on contracts that were, for the duration of the, of the CRF funding that, was stipulated. The contracts with the partners were also stipulated as, running through December 31st, unless there was additional funding. So I think that probably still makes sense to me, that there should be an action taken to, expressly move forward in this direction. But I have not, until you brought it up, thought of whether, just because we're continuing, all of the components that we currently have in place, whether that negates the need to actually have a vote. So.
Okay. I guess it'll be in the following slides when we talk about the minimum wage. I think maybe that'll help bring it together. One of the concerns that I had thinking about voting, or rather approving this recommendation via a vote, is that it might close the door, and this is probably just me overthinking it, close the door if the board wanted to add the minimum wage, or if there was a change to that. So I just didn't know if that would play a role. And again, I might just be overthinking it, but we'll wait to see what the other slides on minimum wage say. Thank you.
And just, if I can respond to that, I don't think that it closes the door by any stretch of the imagination. So we can come back to that.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple questions, Superintendent, about just some of the logistics, which I'm just curious if this is to go forward. And I know you just mentioned the contract piece. So I'm just curious, like just extending for a month. I mean, all these programs, I remember you mentioning before, they've kind of, I'm hoping that this change was recent enough that we had to, say we have to end our relationship with these programs, that there'll be some ability to keep those folks in these positions. I guess I'm just curious how those I'm assuming it would just be reaching out to those programs, right? And
that was the nature of our inquiry with the programs yesterday, whether they would be able to continue for another month.
Oh, okay. So that's already been discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So there is interest in that, and
yes,
going forward. Okay. So I think I just want to throw out there that, one of my, just always I'm struggling working families in the front of my mind, always. And I know we don't know when funding's coming. I guess I just would like to know, I get that we have to kind of do the stopgap right now, but I'm just wondering, as soon as funding is coming, like, are we going to continue having the conversation about, building on these programs that already exist or expanding? I'm just kind of trying to get my head around like when that would be a potential, if we're just looking at the 1 month to start here.
Right. So we're not thinking of expanding. That is not, we feel like, we've hit our capacity. We worked hard in the early fall to find partners, and we did, and these partners have been awesome. And, but there aren't people calling us every other day saying like, I'd love to run a program. So I don't think that we are looking to expand. We obviously want to give people as much time as possible. That's why we, went through this process, starting in early December and communicating with people, in advance, letting them know that this might happen. We now have an opportunity for a reprieve. Our goal would be to come back to you on January 19th, as, we mentioned, to sort of say like, okay, this is what we know. And given that, on February 5th, this is what we're going to ask you to vote. So our commitment is to come back to you, as soon as we have information. If we had detailed information by January 5th, which is, the next board meeting, we could do that. But I doubt very much that we will have anything, given that the next 2 weeks are going to be, loaded with lots of vacations and things along those lines. So I don't think that we'll be in a position to do that on January 5th. But I hear you about people wanting to know. And so we've worked hard to make sure that people knew beforehand where we were going, and now we will make sure that they know where we are and what the reprieve looks like at this point.
Okay, can I just clarify then? That was helpful to understand. I guess my misunderstanding maybe was that expansion of community programs is not solely an issue of funding, but of actual programs that are available and physical space staff. So is that right? That the fact that we are not on track to be expanding those programs is less about funding than about like just that not being a physical and staff option? Is that?
I mean, remember, we left $4 million on the table in CRF funding that we could not, figure out. So if we had had additional partners, an additional demand, we would have, definitely done that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay, I think we can move on to the minimum wage conversation, hazard pay.
Yep. So around the minimum wage, just sort of a refresher for everybody that was approved as part of the, multiple referendum items that were voted on in November. What it does is it provides hazard pay supplement up to 2/3 of the minimum wage, which raises it from $12 to $18 for folks making less than that during a declared emergency. And it's currently, as Member Burke alluded to, it's currently unclear whether it can go into effect when the minimum wage provisions don't actually kick into until January of 2022. So as you know, there's, our board council has weighed in on this and has said that they concur with the city's corporation council that it does not, that it will not go into effect. And they feel confident that that's the way that, that's the legal interpretation of it. And as you know, there's a petition that's been filed by Portland businesses and the Chamber of Commerce asking for declaratory judgment on the matter. So basically, the court ruling, no, there is no, there is no hazard pay supplement because the referendum is not kick in until January of 22. So my understanding is that briefs on that are due on January 15th and that they're expecting that the judge will rule on it by the end of the month. So, I think that informs why we are, hoping to sort of hold off and not make a decision on that until there is a declaratory judgment. If, at the time the judge says, absolutely, you should, pay people that don't make $18 an hour, the hazard pay supplement that they're entitled to, we will obviously do that, and we'll do that retroactive to the beginning of January when it does, when it would kick in, assuming that that's when it kicks in. So a couple of things that we prepared, at the request of Board Chair Figdor is just who is affected by this and, what are the associated costs. So, you saw the figure of 85,000, but where does that come from? And so this first cut on it is sort of showing you the number of employees that fall into the different categories below $18 and what the associated cost is with moving them up to the $18 that would be the minimum wage that we would pay while we continue to be in this declared emergency. And so you can see, there's 11 people that make less than $15 an hour. And then, there are 42 that make between 15 and 16, 15 that make between 16 and 17, and 30 that make between 17 and 18. And you can see who those folks are in terms of the category of employees. So, these are, our frontline cafeteria staff, a lot of our miscellaneous employees, as well as, our temporary employees. We have some of our custodians that are also in that category, particularly sort of getting to the higher end of that, and also some bus assistants that kick in at that $17 an hour range. So this is the cost for bringing those people up to the $18 an hour for the remainder of this fiscal year. So then that would obviously, if the emergency were to continue, would continue to receive that wage, and that would be factored into our budget for the following year for a full year. This is another cut on that same information. So this is by type of employee. So you can see, how many of them are in each of those categories, what the range is for that particular designation of employee, and, what it would cost to bring them up to that $18 an hour minimum wage all the way through the end of this fiscal year. And then the last look that I think is an important one for you to, sort of appreciate and wrestle with is, the impact of something like this on wage compression. So there are 140 employees who are just above that amount, who are, going to be, basically their, wages are going to be compressed. A bunch of people that, that were making less than them are going to, be right where they are. And so I think it's important that you consider that, because I can guarantee you that these will, this will be something that these folks rightly will come back and say, we're doing the same level of work, and, we don't have, a supplement in our, to our pay. And so I think it was important to also show that. So I think from my perspective, I know that the board has an interest in moving this forward, and I believe that if that is the will of the voters, that it should be implemented. But given that it is unclear at this point whether that needs to be done, I would ask that we refrain from doing it until the judge rules on it. And at that point, if, that is in place, we would, obviously do what is, the will of the voters as, as acted on by the court, and, make people whole for the entire period of time.
Are there questions from the board? Mr. Burke.
Thank you. Thanks for laying this out. I'm curious if you've spoken, or anyone has spoken with any of the businesses or entities that have moved forward with implementing this, regardless of waiting for the court's determination.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Are there other questions?
I have a question.
Mr. Irish.
Has there been any consideration with respect to that second tier on what that level might look like? That last slide that you showed.
What it would mean to raise their wages?
Has there been any speculation on whether or not their time and service, or what they do with respect to their responsibilities, what their wages might look like? Is there a potential increase for those also?
So, I mean, I think, no, we've not, modeled any of that, because it will continue to compress wages. There's another group of people that are making $20 and another group that's making $22. So, in every case, it will just continue to push it will continue to push upwards. So we have not modeled it. It's simple enough, says me who's not going to do it, and Miranda's smirking over over there. It's something that we can do, but we've not analyzed what it would actually cost. But it would obviously increase the cost.
Thank you.
Okay, I think this might be the time when it would be appropriate for an amendment.
Yeah.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Chair, I'm wondering if it's better to get public comment, and then when we come back to discussion, then have amendments at that point.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you so much for the suggestion. Okay, with that, let's move to public comment. As a reminder, here are the procedures for how public comment will be taken. Members of the public can use the raise your hand feature provided by Zoom. This feature is either found on the webinar control bar at the bottom of your screen, or can be found by selecting your name on the participant screen. I will call in the Zoom name of the participant with their hand raised in order to address the board, and members of the public are asked to state their name and address and will have 3 minutes to comment. Should you near the 3-minute mark, I will see if additional time is needed. An additional 3 minutes may be granted by board consent. If additional time is granted and the speaker reaches the 6-minute mark, please know that we'll have to mute your mic. So with that, is there any public comment? And again, this is on the superintendent's recommendation with respect to the budget. All right, it doesn't look like there's public comment at this time, so we'll move into board discussion. So is there any board
offer that I'm not sure that you actually need an amendment, but if you did, and I don't, others can judge whether it would just simply be something like adding superintendent's amended recommendation or as amended or something along those lines to address what I've proposed, which I understand could change if there was then an amendment to include something regarding the minimum wage.
Thank you, Superintendent. Is there board discussion? Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just I'm still pondering a few things, but I just wanted to state that while I appreciate the superintendent making the board aware of the impact that bringing those lower wage earners up, that pointing to what the folks that are just outside of that margin, I totally recognize that that's a reality in the workplace. However, I worry that just by bringing that up, we set this tone of almost like pitting people against each other, and I want to make sure that that's not at all what we're doing here. Not want to make sure, but I want to be clear that that's not what we're doing, but rather just explaining to the board, what happens in an organization when wages are increased from the bottom up. And this is a very common problem when we talk about bringing up minimum wage, that the people that are just outside of the targeted group have to deal with then, being cut up. It's a really awkward thing that happens in the economy. It's not unique to our situation here. And it is something that we need to be aware of. However, I believe that the intent of the minimum wage increase and the hazard pay is precisely to help those lower earners. And the will of the voters when they passed this referendum, certainly when I voted in favor of it, that's why I had in mind. And I also did not have 2022 in mind. I had the immediate pandemic in mind. So, I'm going to listen to see if there's any other board discussion, but depending on the direction of our discussion, I would support an amendment to add the $85,000 estimated cost of the hazard pay and minimum wage increase into the superintendent's recommendation. But again, I want to see what where the discussion leads us first.
Is there any other board discussion? Ms. Trevorrow?
Well, I can get us started with an amendment to pass the superintendent's recommendation for an extension of the wraparound services as amended by his presentation tonight.
The second motion.
Thank you. That was seconded by Ms. Thompson. And may I ask a clarifying question? Would it be sufficient, Ms. Trevorrow, as the superintendent proposed, just to add into the motion one word to say we're considering the superintendent's recommendation for continuing and reducing the superintendent's amended recommendation for continuing and reducing services currently funded through the Coronavirus Relief Fund after December 31st of this year. So it's just adding that one sentence.
Yes, that's what I sort of intended to do. I just didn't have it in front of me. I don't know if we need to should we take out reducing?
It's continuing and reducing.
Yeah. So do you want to clarify, Ms. Trevorrow, what your amendment is again?
So my amendment is just to support the plan that the superintendent put forward. I think, there's obviously a secondary issue that we discussed, which is the minimum wage. And for now, my amendment doesn't address that part of it.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions on the motion? Mr. Burke.
Yeah, thank you. This may be procedural, but it may be a question directly to Member Trevorrow if she would be agreeable to adding an amendment to include instituting the hazard pay as part of this motion.
So I procedurally, I see we could work this one of two ways. Either we could take that as a friendly amendment, or we could vote on it as a separate amendment after we vote on this amendment. And I guess I would turn to the chair to see how she would prefer to do that.
I guess my inclination would be to do it all at once, if possible, if that is satisfactory with you, Ms. Trevorrow.
So it's fine with me if it's fine with the seconder.
Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. Procedurally, I think we should take it as two separate motions because the superintendent's bringing forward a recommendation and then you're making an amendment to that. So we really should put, as Ms. Trevorrow said, one motion forward, and then if someone wants to bring a motion to amend it to include the hazard pay, that would be a separate motion because you're circumventing what he's brought forward. So they're two separate motions.
Okay, so we're going to move forward with Ms. Trevorrow's initial amendment, given that Ms. Thompson, as a person who seconded it, does not support that friendly amendment to it. So are there any further questions on the motion? And again, the motion is to adopt the superintendent's proposed plan for continuing to fund the Community Partners Program and through January, and for continuing services funded through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. The reason why I'm saying about the two, because there's two different things. One, again, we're bringing forward the superintendents, and then it's not a friendly amendment to add the hazard pay. That's a significant change from what the superintendent is recommending. So that would not be a friendly amendment to it. If you were changing language, that's a friendly amendment from, discontinuing or continuing or what have you. But adding in the hazard pay as a friendly amendment, it's definitely not a friendly amendment because you're a significant amount of money. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I appreciate that clarification. Ms. Trevorrow, do you have your hand up?
I do, and I just wanted to make a procedural point for any new members that might find it helpful. Is one where we vote on an amendment, and then that brings us back to the main motion. So at that point, we would have an opportunity for more amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Trevorrow. Okay, any additional questions on the amendment? Okay, let's move to public comment. Is there any public comment on the amendment, which is to move forward with the superintendent's revised recommendations? If you do have public comment, please use the raise your hand function that Zoom provides, either at the bottom of your screen or next to your name if you click on your name. Okay, is there board discussion? Ms. Trevorrow.
I just wanted to say that I'm happy to support this proposal. I think I've said this before, but in public education, I think we have learned the ways over decades that public education has expanded to take on various roles that long ago were not traditionally part of public education. And one thing that the pandemic has brought about is the public education's role in providing childcare for families and thereby contributing to the economy, allowing parents to work. And so when we were able to offer these services in the fall, I was very happy. I thought it was an exceptional service that the superintendent and staff put together and made it happen. And so I'm really happy that we'll be able to continue with it and provide that stability for our families.
Thank you, Ms. Trevorrow. Mr. Burke.
Yeah, likewise, I'll support the motion. And it has been revealed what a central institution our schools are to our communities and our economy. The way that this was brought forth by the Economic Recovery Committee at the state level made this, the kind of first and foremost thing to be funded being our school so that everything else could move forward. And I'm glad that we're in this position. I hope it resolves itself favorably so we continue paying for this. I want to acknowledge that all change is stressful, whether it's positive or considered negative change. So this little yo-yoing of there's not going to be childcare provided or paid for, there is going to be, is still stressful, even though it's good news. And not that any of our the folks that I would want to say this to are listening in on our little meeting tonight, but to our federal legislators that sat on their hands this long, I'm just ashamed of them that they are just disconnected from what the impacts of their inaction has been on the ground and what it's meant for people. But all that said, I support the superintendent's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Is there any other board discussion? I will add that I will also support this amendment and know that the community partners programs have been a real lifeline to families in our community. As someone with an elementary school student, I know how disruptive and challenging it can be to juggle work responsibilities and having kids home in a way that they've never been there before. And I appreciate the superintendent really pivoting so quickly once news of the deal in Congress had been reached, pivoting so quickly to see if we could move forward with this stopgap measure in order to provide families at least continued care through January as we learn more about how this funding will, when we'll get the funding and how much and all of the details. So I am happy to support this amendment and thank the superintendent for bringing it to us today. So with that, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support action to approve the superintendent's revised recommendation for continuing services currently funded through the Coronavirus Relief Fund after December 31st, 2020.
Can I ask a question before we move into that? And, as you know, I'm not your procedural guru, but I don't think that we voted to accept the amendment to the resolution yet. So I think you have to do that first before you then vote on the content of the amendment.
Sorry, that's what I intended. Yes, thank you. So the amendment is to change the wording to add to clarify that we're approving the superintendent's revised recommendation, and also to remove the word reducing. We're no longer reducing services, we're just continuing services. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in favor of the amendment.
Mr. Burke.
Yes.
Mr. Irish.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better.
Yes.
Ms. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow.
Yes.
Mr. Youssef.
Yes.
Ms. Allen.
Yes.
Ms. Boxer-McCumber.
Yes.
Ms. Chung.
Yes.
Ms. Yangala.
Yes.
And Chair Flickdover.
Yes. Terrific. So the amendment is unanimously approved, including with the students voting in the majority. So with that, we are back to the main motion and continue board discussion. I see Mr. Burke. Mr. Burke, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to make a motion to add an amendment to institute the minimum wage ordinance, including the hazard pay, effective January 1st.
Well, second.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Mr. Rodriguez has seconded the motion, the amendment. Are there questions on the amendment? Okay, is there public comment on the amendment? So this is for the school district to move forward instituting the hazard pay that was passed as part of the minimum wage referendum this November. And if you're a member of the public and would like to comment, please use the raise your hand function in Zoom, either at the bottom of your screen or next to your name. Okay, I don't see any public comment. So now we're back to board discussion, and then this is board discussion on the hazard pay amendment. Ms. Russell-Better.
I was just wondering if it would be possible to look at the slides the superintendent shared earlier. Again, just for me to wrap my head around the numbers and who the staff were. It just isn't clear in my head. Is that?
They are also included in your packet. So if you go to board docs and this PowerPoint is uploaded there.
Okay.
So, which is not to say that we don't put it back up on the screen if you don't mind Miranda doing that, but also just really get close to it. It's also there.
Ms. Russell-Better, did you have anything more or just wanted to see the slides?
I think for now, just wanted to look at the slide. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other board discussion?
I have a question. Are there any union contractual issues with respect to this issue? With respect to pay scales or grades or...
I'm wondering if, Barb, if you would mind attempting to answer that.
So any changes that we make to wages, we need to have a discussion with the union about it. We have not addressed this with the union at this point for ed techs and for base, who are also both of those groups have employees named here.
So provided this moves forward, I can only anticipate if I was in that situation that I would, if I was a union member, I might cause a ruckus. Are we anticipating that kind of battle, or is it just kind of wait and see? I guess that's open-ended.
Barbara, are you going to answer that?
Yeah, I'm happy to say I would anticipate there would be concern from the union when we do something for some of their members and not all of their members. There's generally some amount of concern.
Thank you.
Just noting, in this case, we're not the ones making the decision, but it is indeed the voters who determined the referendum, who voted for the referendum. Is there any other board discussion?
No.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Russell-Better.
I'm sorry, this seems like a really ignorant question, but I just have to ask to be clear. I'm not clear where this money is going to be coming from in the budget. About $85,000.
So we don't currently have an identified source. As you saw in our presentation today, we're looking at an $85,000 deficit right now, which would now become $170,000 deficit that we would need to offset. I think I don't want to speak for Mr. Burke, but I think the point that he originally made is, assuming that, we're going to get additional money, couldn't that be used for that? And, even though that money could not be used for that, it doesn't mean that the money that we get from the COVID fund couldn't be used for some of the other things and allow some of our existing dollars to be reallocated to support that, which is what we would, what we will have to do if the court, rules that this in fact is the law of the land. And that's at that point, we'll have to not do something else so that we can do this, absent additional coronavirus money. So these two things are, somewhat independent from each other. We're just sort of grappling with it now because the board asked for this information. Otherwise, we would have had a separate conversation about this at the appropriate time.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess along the same lines of that last question, part of my reasoning to support this is grounded on Miranda's comment earlier tonight, where under the current full picture, that does not include the minimum wage cost, and that leaves us with an $85,000 balance. We refer to that as a manageable amount. If we did not get the stimulus money, and of course, if we did, then it'd be a non-issue. So absent that stimulus money, we get if we do get the stimulus money and then we're back to a balance of 85,000 because of the minimum wage, it's hard for me to still not see it as a manageable amount. That's why I feel comfortable. Again, the close to assurance that we will get stimulus money and the 85,000 being labeled as a manageable amount in our budget. So I feel comfortable with this. It also, again, as the will of the voters, the referendum, as it was understood by many, would have literally had us do what we're attempting to pass through this amendment tonight. So this isn't far from what the majority of Portland expected, and certainly what, as I said earlier, what I expected when I voted in support of the referendum. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Ms. Trevorrow.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Mr. Rodriguez's last sentiment there. I think, obviously it is, we would be passing this expecting additional revenue to be able to cover it. I feel reasonably comfortable that we'll be able to manage it. 85,000 is not, it's not a huge price tag. I had just kind of a implementation question, I guess. Assuming that this passes tonight, and then let's say the court strikes down the ordinance, would we then stop paying the hazard pay? Anybody knows the answer to that?
There's nothing that would prevent you from raising people's wages, independent of the referendum, so I don't necessarily think you would have to stop doing it. I think, it to Mr. Irish's question and to sort of my point with, wage compression, it would become, you wouldn't be able to say that it's the will of the voters. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I don't think there's nothing that prevents us from, handing out money to people. That's the board's purview.
And as I kind of interpret this amendment, it's basically approving funds through the end of the fiscal year. So I would think it would come with that commitment. I am conflicted insofar as I'm always conflicted when I'm faced with not following the recommendation of the superintendent. I usually want to do that. I also feel a moral imperative to live up to the will of the voters, which to me seem to have spoken pretty clearly, and because it's the right thing to do in a pandemic for workers who are at the lower end of the pay scale. So I think recognizing that I respect the recommendation of the district, I will, in this case, vote in support of this amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Trevorrow. Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I also concur with Mrs. Trevorrow's comment about the superintendent supporting the superintendent and also the will of the voters. And while I did hear loud and clear from the voters of what they wanted, I think right now, and having been on the board for a long time, that this will have a ripple effect through our various unions. We just approved an increase with the PAA because the teachers' salaries crept up to the PAA salaries, and then we had to up them. And so having, I guess, been around for a while, it won't stop here. And I certainly know that these are some of our hardest workers in the district, but I still think there's a lot of gray area to this. And I do think that there's legal challenges currently on both sides of the issue. So my question to the superintendent is, should, I think it's kind of on what Ms. Trevorrow said, if we don't pass it, which I think there's a majority of the board here that will this evening, but if we don't pass it, would we be responsible for back pay from the date that the effective? I would think so. Okay. You're muted.
Yes, we would. And I just want to be clear that, my recommendation is to hold off until we know that we have to do that. That's the reason. I'm not saying that we should fight it. I'm not saying we should file injunction or do anything along those lines. I just, I'm saying that we should wait. And, when the time comes when this is, resolved, if we're required to do it, we do it. If we're not required to do it, we don't do it, because it is, it has all of these other implications that I think you're aware of. And, I don't think that we, if we wanted to raise the minimum wage in the district, we should do that through our contractual, through our, contracts, through our bargaining units, not, here in the midst of all of these other conversations.
Thank you very much. So I'm not going to be voting in favor of this evening for that reason, because I do think it'll have more financial repercussions for us. And again, I do know that these are some of our hardest workers, and we've always been very supportive of all of our unions, especially our base workers. But until we have a clear guidance from the courts, I think it's best for us to sit tight. But again, I know it's probably going to pass this evening. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify? I know Ms. Trevorrow mentioned the fiscal year, but is that what we would be voting on with this amendment? Would we be voting on increasing and doing the hazard pay for this fiscal year? Is that what we're deciding now? Or is it hazard pay for the period that this is considered a pandemic? I just want to clarify what the hazard pay definition and what we'd be voting on for a period of time. I guess I'm just confused.
I think that's a good question and a good clarification. I think the provision is the provision in the referendum is for the duration of the state of emergency. So it could be for, it could be for another month, it could be for another 6 months, it could be for another, year or whatever it is. But at this point, the provision is for while there's a declared civil emergency. So I don't know what that means in terms of, how this is being done, sort of attached to this other bill. So I'm not prepared to answer that question. I don't know what the spirit and intent of this proposal is. Is it to do it regardless of whether we're in a civil emergency or only if we are in a civil emergency? Is it, so I think, that you all have to discuss and reach an agreement on that. And that's why I'm really, I don't think that this is, the way that we should be making this, this move within, the sort of the broader provision of continuing services that were discontinued by CRF. But, this is where we are.
I saw Mr. Irish raise his physical hand. So Mr. Rodriguez, I see you, but let's first go to Mr. Irish.
Sorry, I think one of the slides indicated that there was this pending court action that might have the possibility. I don't know whether the briefs needed to be filed by the end of January or whether or not there was an anticipated decision by the end of January.
That's correct. By the end of January, briefs due January 15th.
Right. So if we're meeting February 5th, would it not be prudent just to stand by until we have actionable intelligence from the court with respect to how the city of Portland is going to move forward? And that I don't know that it's necessarily directed to anybody, but it's just my thought process with respect to this decision. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irish. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I was going to speak along those lines. My understanding is that what we're waiting for the judge to decide is the timing of implementation, whether it can wait until 2022, not whether it will be implemented at all. So what this amendment intends to do is to start the implementation of it as the referendum intended it to be, which is now in December 22nd, I believe was the date that most people had envisioned. So again, just to be clear, the judge decision is not whether or not this will be implemented, just how long rather the city can postpone it. Given that we are, and I'm saying this with all fingers crossed and knocking on wood, seeing it that we are experiencing, or rather seeing the foundation of the end of the pandemic with the vaccine rolling out by 2022, we will not have a state of emergency. And given the hardship that families, particularly those low-wage earners, are experiencing right now, this seems like a morally right decision to make for us as a board.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Burke.
Yeah, thank you. Like others have mentioned, I like to follow the superintendent's guidance as well, and hear what he's raising as concerns here. But I look at this list of folks, and they are not the only, but are integral to our ability to have our school buildings open. And I presume many of them are the last in to make that possible. The aides, the custodians, and thus they're on the lower end of the scale. I could be wrong in that assumption, but that's part of my assumption. And I understand the issues of wage compression and union negotiations and such. The base unit was agreeable to postpone negotiations for this year. And as we see here, they sit at the lower end of our pay scale and are essential to our ability to have in-person instruction, to feed our kids, all that. So it is a moral decision for me. I understand that it's perhaps a little messy, but I'm, as Member Rodriguez brought up as well, I'm just not comfortable with that there's the cartoon of the person with all the chips and then two people with a chip each, and the person with all the chips is getting the people with the one chip each to argue with each other about who has more chips. And when we're talking at this level of pay, and we're talking at this scale of money, and knowing where else resources are allocated, not only in the district, but nationally, it's just a more morally easy choice for me to ensure that those that are doing this essential work and exposing themselves to do so should at least get this level of pay.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Ms. Chung.
Oh, yes, and if you'll just let me catch my breath. Oh, anytime I put my hand up, my heart starts beating like 10 times faster. My question is just that I was having a little bit of a misunderstanding because of what Mr. Rodriguez said and what Ms. Thompson said. Ms. Thompson brought up the point that if the judge was to, well, I guess what Mr. Rodriguez says, to postpone it further, the money would be coming for hazard pay from our district, is what it sounded like. And then what Mr. Rodriguez said is, since that would be happening further, be postponing, what would the repercussions be for our district from like any financial concern? I just was having like a little bit of confusion there.
May I raise a question, just jumping off of that, Mr. Superintendent, which is, it seems like we might need some legal clarification in the case that the court delayed implementation until 2022. Where does that leave us? I know you said we, clearly have the authority, but it does seem like we might need some legal clarification. You're shaking your head no. You're muted. It's the last day of the school year.
What clarification would you need? I'm not sure. I mean, you have the ability to make a decision to implement it without a referendum. So I don't know that you need a legal clarification. You have the right to do it. You have no obligation to do it.
I think the issue is that we'd be doing it with respect to how the referendum formulated the provision, and so that to me would be, would be the question, but I hear what you're saying as well. Ms. Trevorrow and Ms. Chung, thank you so much for the question. Clearly, it was a very good one. Ms. Trevorrow.
So, did anybody write down the motion? Could we read it back? Or the amendment?
Mr. Burke, do you want to repeat it? Or if not, I can try.
I don't know if, Anne, did you write it down by any chance?
I didn't catch all of it. It would be great if Adam could repeat it.
A motion to adopt the minimum wage ordinance, including the implementation of hazard pay. I think I said effective January 1, but it should be effective today.
And so I interpret that to mean that we're honoring the spirit of the ordinance regardless of what the court decides for the duration of a declared emergency. Okay. So if that happens before the end of the fiscal year, then the hazard pay goes away. Okay. Got it.
Ms. Russell-Better.
Okay, this is really belaboring this point, but I just, after Mr. Trevorrow said that, I just have to say it again to make sure I'm clear. So I know I asked about the hazard pay and the period of time. We don't know that. So with this proposal, we would be doing both things. We would be increasing the minimum wage, which would be, that wouldn't have a time frame, right? There would be that piece and also the hazard pay piece for the period of that being appropriate. They're the two different pieces. Is that correct?
I think the minimum wage requirement does not go into effect until January of 2022. The intent of the hazard pay was to go into effect immediately during the pandemic, but
okay.
The city and the city's legal counsel and our legal counsel have said that, in fact, the hazard pay effective date was attached to the minimum wage effective date, and so wouldn't be until January 2022.
So thank you, Chair. So this is not actually changing. We're not with this proposal trying to do the minimum wage piece. This is specifically because that's what I first thought, and then I thought maybe I missed the part about the longer term minimum wage. So this is solely for this hazard pay piece, and I apologize that I'm belaboring this, but just wanted to make sure.
That's exactly correct. So Mr. Burke's amendment is with respect to moving forward with the hazard pay provision of the minimum wage referendum.
Thank you. I had confused the 2022 piece and thinking that we were able to also amend that piece. So thank you for clarifying.
And then I guess my apologies to raise this very late in the process of this discussion, but I did not hear myself the effective date of today. And I wonder about that because I believe that the supporters of the referendum and many businesses around Portland have already implemented the hazard pay. So I would think that we would want to fully implement it, including when the effective date of the referendum was, which I'm not sure. I think Mr. Rodriguez might have referred to it earlier. Sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head. But Mr. Burke, I guess, again, apologies for the late question, but wondering why we choose today as the effective date rather than when the ordinance went into effect.
Oh, because my understanding was it was December 22nd, which is today. That's what I heard Member Rodriguez said.
You're muted, Berto.
No, I didn't have anything to say. I prepared that. That's what I said earlier.
Just a question about a friendly amendment. Do we want to just make it effective? Since I'm not sure we're certain about the date being today. Perhaps we are, but do we want to make it effective as of the effective date of the provision?
I'm agreeable to that friendly amendment.
Ms. Figdor, may I just, I can't raise my hand as a co-host, so I wasn't sure how to interject, but my original, and I'm not 100% certain either, but my original understanding when it was first passed was that it was 30 days after the vote. So that was what I had originally planned before it was determined that, in fact, it may be delayed. So I would, I think it's a great idea to add that, so we can kind of go back to that and confirm that later. Another thing I just wanted to ask is, if necessary, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking about my payroll department here. And I just wondered if there needs to be any specificity on when we're first going to see this in paychecks, because I really don't see myself able to implement it in the next paycheck, which would be December 31st, given the holidays. So if we could have until the following paycheck, if that could, something about that could be included, that would be appreciated.
Ms. Fasula, thank you so much for raising that. And what would be the date of the next paycheck after the 31st?
January 15th.
So, Mr. Burke, I think it's up to you whether you want to take any of this input as friendly amendments.
Right. So with the friendly amendment, it would be a motion to implement the hazard pay effective at the start of the ordinance, which I think Miranda's correct. I think it's December 3rd, actually, when it was supposed to go into effect, and that it would be effective at the time of the next pay period, which was January 15th.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Rodriguez seconded that. So, Mr. Rodriguez, you're good with the friendly amendments?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, any further board discussion? Mr. Youssef.
So, and excuse me if I'm not getting all the wording right, but if what we are waiting is the timing to implement from the court, I think I would support to move forward with the hazard because of the need of the timing and the support that our workers need at this time. We don't know what is going to happen. We're hoping that things are getting better, and respecting and giving value to the voter's choice is something that I would value about it, and thus I would support to move forward with the hazard.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Any other board discussion? I'll say that I will support this amendment. I also, as several board members have articulated, believe that this is the moral thing to do to provide for our lowest wage workers in the midst of a pandemic. I know that there are businesses all over the city that have already started to provide hazard pay and see it as our obligation to follow the will of the voters and not to let a technicality in the law keep our lowest wage workers from being able to support themselves and their families in this time of economic hardship. I also wanted to mention that, I believe that wage compression is a real issue, but with respect to our recent PAA contract with our principals and assistant principals, part of the reason why I think the main impetus for raising the salaries of our PA employees was the fact that our salaries are not regionally competitive. So I just wanted to provide that context. So thank you, Mr. Burke, for bringing this amendment, and I will very strongly support it. With that, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support the motion to adopt the minimum wage ordinance, including hazard pay, at the time of the ordinance. Okay, sorry. I'm going to try this again. By roll call vote, please indicate if you support the Mr. Burke's amendment to adopt the minimum wage ordinance, including hazard pay, to be implemented with effective at the time of the effective date of the ordinance, which was December 3rd, to be implemented with the January 15th paycheck, meaning that we'd start the program, we'd start paying hazard pay on December 3rd, but our employees would see that pay on January 15th. Okay, sorry for my long explanation. Mr. Superintendent, will you read the roll? You're muted.
I have these dogs that come in here panting and shaking and mute myself, and then I forget. I apologize. Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Irish?
No.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
No.
Ms. Trevorrow?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Allen?
Yes.
Ms. Boxer-McCumber?
Yes.
Ms. Chung?
Yes.
Ms. Yangala?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes. So the motion passes, the amendment passes by a vote of 5-2. Is that right? 6-2? Sorry, 6-2. I didn't count myself. With the students voting in the affirmative. Now we're back to discussion on the main motion, which is now amended by both Ms. Trevorrow's amendment to clarify that we're talking about the superintendent's revised recommendation, as well as with Mr. Burke's amendment with respect to including hazard pay. So is there board discussion? All right, so you want me to actually read the motion now? Okay. So this is consideration. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in favor of action to approve the superintendent's revised recommendation for continuing services currently funded through the Coronavirus Relief Fund after December 31st, 2020, with the addition of including hazard pay effective December 3rd and showing up in staff paychecks on January 15th. Mr. Superintendent, will you read the roll?
Yes. Madam Chair, Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Irish?
No.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Allen?
Yes.
Ms. Boxer-McCumber?
Yeah.
Ms. Chung?
Yes.
Ms. Yangala?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes.
So that's 7-1.
Sorry, Mr. Superintendent, I didn't hear that.
7-1.
Thank you. All right, so we are now moving, since it is prior to the hour of 10, we are moving to public comment. So is there any public comment on items not on this evening's agenda? And as a reminder, if you want to speak as a member of the public, use the raise your hand feature provided by Zoom. And if I see that there is public comment, I will remind everyone about the rules for public comment. Okay, I am going to close public.
You muted.
Can't hear you, Emily.
Ha, it's catching, Mr. Superintendent. Okay, so we're now, did you hear me say that I closed public comment? I closed public comment. Okay, great. So now we're about to adjourn, but just to remind everyone before we adjourn that we are going to have a short workshop after our meeting about the Living Contract Committee and the update to Article 10G of the PEA collective bargaining agreement. So is there a motion to adjourn the business meeting? Ms. Trevorrow, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Rodriguez, all in favor? You can just indicate by raising your hand. It looks to be unanimous. We are adjourned at 8:31 p.m.